Hello, my name is Leah. If you guys have been around here and working with Africa Fire Mission for a while, I might be a new face, but hopefully you will see a lot more of me just in the future and in future Zoom trainings. But I just want to thank you guys for joining and welcoming you here today. Just to let you guys know, this is a free training with Africa Fire Mission, and we are not currently offering any certificates for these trainings. But hopefully in 2022, we will start trying to offer a few certificates. We're working on that right now. Also, with our trainings coming up in 2022, we're going to have a new registration link. You can find that on our website right now. So if you're registered this year, you're going to have to re-register for 2022. But I just want to introduce Howard to you guys today. He's back. He was here last week as well, so he's just continuing his training with fire dynamics. But I will just hand it over to him now. He will share an encouraging word with you guys.
Hi, everybody. I see some familiar names from last week. It's nice to see you again. I am going to start with a words of encouragement that like Jose usually does. But since Jose is still on vacation, I've offered to do it. So I'm going to read something to you. Setting yourself to loving other people creates an opportunity to deal with the aspects of your inner self that are less than whole. Those incomplete traits define your personal spiritual curriculum. If you do not work to support that growth, if you do the work to support that growth, you will make progress toward acquiring the inner way of being that you seek. Then you'll be truly ready to love. And if you don't do that work, the sad and inevitable fact is that you will keep getting the same life tests over and over again until you either wake up to accomplishing the growth that has been assigned to you, or you learn your lessons the hard way by means of bitter experience. So this is just a reflection on personal growth, which has corollaries in our life as firefighters. If we aren't prepared to grow and challenge ourselves and learn lessons, then we're stuck, and we could potentially be dangerous to ourselves or to our co-firefighters. But on a personal spiritual growth level, we also have to be willing to open ourselves up to the challenges, to the aspects of our personal lives, our social, our spiritual lives that need attention and need some strengthening. So, if you can essentially affirm the message, just give a shout out, just sort of an amen, or your hands together, sort of like you heard the lesson and you want to grow to be more in love with the world around you. And on that, I'll assume you're doing that. And with that, I'm going to jump into my lesson for today. So by now, some of you, I'm a familiar face and teacher to some of you. For those of you to whom I'm new, I live in the northeast corner of the United States in a small state called Vermont. And I recently retired, not quite a year ago, as the deputy chief of a volunteer fire department, and have been shifted almost all my fire service energy and focus on my involvement with Africa Fire Mission, which included a trip to Nairobi last fall. And I'm happy to say I've already put my deposit down for the trip next year. Hopefully COVID will not get in the way of that. So today, what I wanted to spend time talking to you about is basically a fundamental pre-firefighting kind of bit of knowledge that we really have to have and remind ourselves and review periodically. And that's basically fire dynamics. So if we don't understand fire and what fire is, how it operates, so forth and so on, then we're at risk. We're not in a position to be as safe and as effective as we would like to be. So for today, I'm going to define fire. which seems kind of like a silly thing for firefighters to have to do, but it's important anyway to do it because it's really the foundation. I'm going to talk about how heat is transferred from one place to another, what that means to us in terms of our firefighting. We're going to talk about fire flow. Again, understanding fire and the dynamics of fire. This is really important. And fire flow is important to understand so that you don't get yourself into a dangerous situation and you're better at putting out fires. I'm going to show you a demonstration about how smoke is fuel and why this is important to pay attention to in the course of firefighting. And lastly, hopefully there'll be enough time to deal with this as I'd like to, and that is about reading smoke, because smoke is definitely is a byproduct of fire. And if you can read smoke, it can help you understand what's going on with the fire that you're trying to tackle. So with that, let me dive in and say, in simple English, fire dynamics is the study of how fires start, spread, develop, and are put out. I hope that my attempt to translate this into Swahili is accurate. So I put it up here in Swahili, not because I don't think you understand my English or the English that I have on my slides, but because I thought it might be welcome to you, something welcoming to you to see some of this material also in Swahili. If my Swahili is wrong, Google Translate got it wrong, let me know and I won't use it anymore. And by the way, as I'm going through this teaching, if you have any questions or you need clarification about something, whatever it might be, let me know. Either put your hand up and hopefully Leah will hear you, will see it and she'll let you know, she'll let me know, or go ahead and unmute yourself and say, hey, Howard, I have a question. That'll be fine. Okay. So I like to say that if for some of you this seems like a redundant or repetition or too simple because you've been in the fire service for a while, I apologize. For those of you for whom this might be new stuff, I'm happy to be able to be presenting this new information to you. But I do want to say to you guys, to you folks who've been around for a while, we say here in the United States that a firefighter starts to get dangerous after about 5 years in the business. Why? Well, when you come out of the fire academy after your initial trainings, you're like, you get all this material knowledge, you're gung-ho to go, you're all about learning. A few years into your career, you start getting, confident to the point of overconfident to complacent, and then you start to forget things because, after all, forgetting is one of the great blessings of life. And next thing you know, you've forgotten some basic stuff, and now you're potentially dangerous. So even if you've been around for a while,
you are not screen sharing. If you are trying to show your slides, you're not showing your slides right now.
Well, thank you for telling me. I totally spaced out on that.
You are fine.
Shame on me. All right, there you go. Sorry, guys. Let me go back. Hey, here's my Swahili. Did I get it right? If it's not right, let me know. And thank you, Leah, for pointing that out to me. I'm chagrined. Okay, so here we are. There are 3 reasons for you to understand fire dynamics as a firefighter. Number 1 is to keep yourself safe. And then in parentheses after that is to keep your fellow firefighters safe. Number 2, it's to save lives. By the way, that might be your life or your partner's life you're saving, not just the life of the civilians that you're helping. And number 3, it's to save property. The more you understand about how fire functions, how it works, what makes it up, the better you are at saving burning structures. Bottom line, friends, if you don't understand the dangers you face, you won't know if or when you're in real danger. So our biggest danger as firefighters, besides driving to the fire scene, is the fire we're facing. So it's important for us to really understand fire. So what is fire? Is the Swahili correct? Somebody give me a thumbs up if the Swahili is correct for the question, what is fire? Anybody? Is it right? Oh, right. Good. Thank you. So I want to play a short video for you. It does a really nice job of getting into the science of what's fire, but it does it without being too scientific. So let me play this short video for you.
Mid-1800s, Michael Faraday gave a series of Christmas lectures for kids at the Royal Institution in London. And one of his favorite subjects to talk about was fire. Faraday was particularly interested in candles because inside their delicate flames, they hold some amazing lessons on how fire really works. Like, you might have seen fire described like this in chemistry class, but the chemical formula doesn't explain what fire is any more than a recipe explains what chocolate chip cookies taste like. The first thing we notice about a candle flame is all those colors. Hot things glow because of black body radiation, which we talked about in our video about the color of the universe. But down at the bottom of the flame, it's hotter, so it glows blue. In the middle, it's a little cooler, so it glows yellowish, orangish. Inside of that flame, there could be hundreds of chemical reactions taking place. The oxygen in the air and the carbon and hydrogen in the candle, they don't do anything on their own. It takes a little outside heat to get things started. Solid fuel is vaporized by the heat and ripped into smaller chunks. This is called pyrolysis, and you can't have a flame without it. You can sometimes see a dark cone around the wick where there's no fire. That's where vaporized wax is coming off the candle, but it hasn't started to burn yet. The hydrocarbons and oxygen in the air slam into each other, and their atoms begin to rearrange. Sometimes electrons in those atoms get into an excited state. When they come back down again, they give off light. That's why the bottom of the flame glows blue. Not all the carbon in the candle gets converted to CO2, so leftover carbon atoms come together and form tiny particles of soot, which heat up and glow orange and yellow like the hot coals under a grill. This glowing soot is where most of a candle's light comes from. Eventually, at the tip of the flame, all the soot is burned away, and we're left with only carbon dioxide and water floating off into the air. You can investigate all the different parts of a flame for yourself with just a cold piece of metal. Up here, we find water vapor. In the yellow part of the flame, soot. And down just next to the wick, we can even recover unburned wax. Flames look really cool too. They're almost hypnotic. Wait, what was I talking about? Oh, right, shape. Gravity pulls cool, denser air down and makes hot air rise. And this buoyancy is what gives flames their familiar shape. But if you light a flame in 0G, say on the space station, it'll look very different. All the chemical and quantum reactions that make a flame glow can only happen where it meets the air. So even though they look like solid cones, candle flames are actually hollow. As long as there's fuel and oxygen, the flame will burn and burn. Why? It's not the molecular ripping apart that makes a flame hot. It's the formation of new molecules and new bonds. It's what creates heat. And that heat drives the chain reaction forward, vaporizing more fuel, slamming more molecules into one another, and making the fire burn off. Our species has been gathering around fire for thousands of years, telling stories, asking questions over a flickering flame. And that's part of what helped make us human in the first place. Stay curious.
So I like to show that this video because it discusses fire, but not from the firefighter's perspective, but it covers all the kinds of things we need to pay attention to as firefighters. So what is fire? The short answer is a chemical reaction. And as a result of that chemical reaction, we see light and feel heat from the chemical reaction. So moving on, you've all probably seen this. It's called the fire pyramid, or now we call it the tetrahedron because it's got 4 elements to it. And basically, if you look at fire, fire equals fuel plus oxygen plus heat plus a chemical process. That's what has to exist for there to be fire. Take away any one of those 4 elements and the fire goes out. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about fuel. But before we get to fuel, let's talk about the three kinds of matter there are. There are solids, liquids, and gas, right? So I included ice cubes, water, and steam as examples of an ice cube is a solid. You raise the temperature, it becomes water. You raise it hot enough, it becomes steam. So solids and liquids themselves do not burn. What burns are the gases coming off of those products. It's really important to remember that. It's the gases coming off the products, and heat is what produces what causes the chemical reaction that causes the gases to be released. So you take something like petrol, when it's in its liquid form, if it's liquid is greater than negative 42.8 degrees Celsius, it's fine, it stays a liquid. If it goes above it, the heat goes above it, it starts to turn to vapors. Those vapors then can ignite. So the point at which a material, a solid or a liquid, starts to off gas, we call the flash point. And the flash point can differs from all kinds of materials and potential fuels. It's important to know what the flash points are, to have some understanding. But what's more important from our point of view as firefighters is to recognize that once a product starts to off gas, to sort of release vapors because of the chemical reaction caused by heat, it's moving towards that flash point or ignition point where fire occurs. Now, when you talk about wood, and wood is the kind of material that we spend a lot of time, a lot of our firefighting has to do with wood and wood-based products, although increasingly, as we all know, we're seeing other kinds of carbon-based products, things that are made out of various forms of plastic. But wood itself, it's a solid, and it also releases vapors, and those vapors ignite. And this process is called pyrolysis. Complicated word. Actually, it turns out when I looked it up to see whether there was a Swahili equivalent to the word pyrolysis, my translator said it's the same word. But basically what pyrolysis is the gases coming off of wood. The thing about wood is that it doesn't have a set temperature for when those gases start to come off. It depends on the condition of the wood, how much humidity there is in the air, and variety of other factors. But no matter what, at some point, if there's enough heat, that wood is going to start off gassing. That gas coming off is ignitable. So here's the definition of pyrolysis. It's a thermal decomposition of material, and that happens because of heat. If this is at all, if you need another kind of way to think about that, just think about building a fire. If you campfire or a cooking fire, we always start with tinder, then we add kindling, then we put the bigger stuff, start small, get bigger and bigger. The reason why we do that is, as you know, if you take a log and you hold a match to it, you're not going to produce enough heat to cause that log to enough gas to ignite. So instead, we break it up into smaller and smaller pieces. The more surface area, the more it absorbs heat, the more likely it's to catch fire. That's what thermal decomposition is. So pretty basic. That's foundational. You probably all pretty much understand that, but it's good to review that triangle, that pyramid, and mechanics of it. So when we're talking about fuel, no matter what the kind of fuel is, what we need to remember is that it is stored energy. And energy is what is going to, when the energy is released, that's what we call fire. So what kind of fuel is it? It matters. How we interact with the fuel, that matters too. So one of the things that we often forget as firefighters is that smoke itself is a form of fuel. So what is smoke? it's the unburned byproducts of a fire, which means it's full of things like the carbon and other chemicals, all of which are can potentially ignite if there's enough heat for it. You'll see in a later video, you'll see a demonstration, but you can do this yourself just as a way of, sort of demonstrate, if you want to demonstrate to other firefighters or to other people, that take a candle, light it, blow out the candle, and then hold a match in the smoke away from the wick. And what you'll see happen is that the candle relights. Why is it relighting? Because the smoke itself is catching fire. Okay. So as I said before, take away any one of the 4 elements in this tetrahedron, the pyramid, take away any one of the 4 elements and the fire goes out. What we use most of the time to put out fires is water. Sometimes we'll use sand, sometimes we'll use dirt if either depending on the kind of fire, but water is our first tool when we're putting out fires. And what does fire do? I mean, what does water do? Well, number one, it cools the surface of whatever's burning, which means that it reduces the offing of gas and therefore reduces the chance, the ignitability of the fire aspect. It smothers the fire, so it's taking away oxygen, and it interrupts the chemical reaction. So the fuel is still there, but the water cools it and makes it harder to ignite, and it reduces the heat, and it starts to suffocate it. So water is our critical tool for us, as we all know. So now we need to get into, so now that we understand fire, we understand the basics of fire, how it works, what creates fire, and how do we put it out, and where it starts from. Let's talk about heat transfer. So heat transfer is, why a fire starts in one corner of the house and ends up in another part of the house. So heat transfer is a major factor in the ignition, growth, spread, decay, and ultimately the extinction of a fire. So we need to understand some aspects of heat transfer. The fundamental thing you need to understand or remember or pass on to your fellow firefighters, especially new ones, is that heat always goes from the hotter object to the cooler object. Now, this is a no-brainer. We all get this. We all understand that, although sometimes we tend to forget that. But the heat always goes from a hotter object. So we have heat here. We cool off the object next to it. We prevent the fire from spreading. One of the major examples of that is that you have a building that's on fire and you don't want it to spread to the building next to it. What do? You hose down the building next to it to cool it down. But the other thing you have to remember, and it seems pretty obvious, but sometimes we forget that, in a fire environment, we are always the cooler object, which means that heat is trying to get to us, which is why wearing the PPE is important and why we need to be careful. So heat transfer always goes from hotter to cooler. There are 3 ways that heat transfers from one object to another. I'm going to go through these in a little bit. So the first is conduction, where heat transfers through within solids or between contacting solids. And I'm going to show you examples of these. Convection, heat transferred by movement of liquid or gases. And then radiation, heat transfer by electromagnetic waves. So conduction. Here's a firefighter crawling on the ground towards a fire. The firefighter's hands are touching the hot floor. So the transfer happens between the hot floor to their knees and their toes and their hands, which is why when we're at really hot environments, we don't want to pat our fellow firefighter on the back because that's going to create a contact for heat to transfer. So here's a classic example of heat transferring from a hotter object to a less hot hot object. The pan is on the stove getting hotter and hotter. You grab it with your hand is cooler. The heat goes from the handle to your hand. Out, you drop the pan. Heat transfer. This is all, you know, we learn all these things when we're really little, but we don't always think about them in the context of firefighting. We sometimes, for whatever reasons, we sometimes get blind spots. Okay, so heat transfer, convection. That's when heat transfers to the air or water. What's a great example of that? Well, you you put hot water in your bathtub and you step into the bathtub, it transfers from the water to you. Or air conditioning. Or if you have a fan on, you're moving the air, you're transferring heat or the coolness by the movement of air or water. So convection. Here's a classic example of convection. The hot air balloon, right? There's a propane heater below this balloon. It heats up the air. The air then rises up into the balloon and off it goes. So heat transfer through air. That's convection. Radiation, that's just the energy coming off the heat source. Radiation coming off a heat source is often a problem with, say, for example, a structure next to a burning building catching fire. The fire itself doesn't jump from one building to the next, but what happens is that the heat from the burning building heats up the building next to it to the point where the gases coming off then ignite. Classic example of radiation, the sun. We get heated by the sun shining down on us. So these are the three methods of heat transfer, important for us to understand by way of understanding fire when we're in a fire structure. Flow path is the movement of the air between a high pressure area to a low pressure area. So the heat or the fire path is always going to go from a place of high pressure to a place of low pressure. High pressure meaning it's all, you know, it's real compact, it's tight, its pressure is building and building. A really familiar example of high pressure moving to low pressure is your tea kettle, right? You have water on your tea kettle, it heats up, hotter, more and more pressure. It's got to go someplace. It goes out the opening. Same thing happens in burning structures. If there's no ventilation and there's only slight ventilation in the building and the fire is building and building, it's building up pressure. It's got to go someplace. It's looking for an outlet. That outlet that it finds creates what's called the flow path. Recognizing that is important so that you don't get caught in the flow path. Number two, and number two, you do to the best of your ability control the flow path. So what's a practical example of that? You come to a building, it's on fire, and as soon as you open the door to go inside, you've created two things. One, a place for the pressure that's building to come out, but also you've created an inlet for more air to come in. That creates a flow path that's going to not only feed the fire, but it's also going to force hot air out of the building. That's important when we start to try to read smoke and understand what's happening in fire dynamics, which we'll look at towards the end of this presentation. So a little bit more about ventilation or flow paths. Basically, ventilation flow paths are air that's moving, air that's trying to rise, going someplace. The air, if it's hot, it wants to rise, and if it can't find anywhere to get out, it's just going to keep building and building and building. And cooler air is heavier, it's more dense, so it's going to come in from the bottom, and that creates the movement. As in the video, he pointed out how the cooler air gets drawn down, gets heated, and it rises, and that gives us the flames, and that's why fire rises, and heat goes up because the cool air comes down and it pushes it up. It's all important. This is sort of the mechanics of when you're trying to understand what's going on in the burning building. That's why the fire dynamics become so important. This is just a slide to give you an example of this on the left is what's called a Bunsen burner. It's just it's a way to have a flame, and you can see how it shows these different colors. The reason why the color on the outside is red is because that's where the heat of the flame coming up is cooling, and because of the air on the outside, and so it's not burning as efficiently. We would say that that's we would call that lean. There's too much air. So if you look at number one, this is a flame with a lot of air. A lot of air impacting on the fire, on the flame, and so it's yellow, it's orange, and that's all because there's too much air and it's creating carbon byproducts. Carbon byproducts is another name for smoke. The more we balance the fuel and the air, the more the color changes. So you have at the end of the blue flame, like you have maybe on a stove, you have it's very rich. You have a lot of fuel and not much air, and so the flame is blue, and there's very little byproduct. So it's burning more efficiently. This is understanding what happens when you vent a burning building. Is that you're letting air in. When you let air in, you get bigger flames, and that's why we'll watch some videos later. You'll see how when you open up a place, all of a sudden the smoke changes and the flame colors change. So this is a video I wanted to show you about reading smoke, because smoke is the byproduct of fire. Smoke is fuel, and so smoke can reignite. But by learning to recognize what's going on because of the smoke in a building, it tells us about what's happening with the fire in the building, and all of that is putting together all the elements of fire dynamics. So this is a firefighter in Mississippi. I hope you can understand his accent as he's going to walk you through some basic elements of reading smoke. And as you listen to him, you'll hear how he's incorporating the different elements of fire dynamics, which I had just been talking about. So here he comes. Matt Hinckley is his name.
So use smoke to tell us a lot of things about a structure fire, especially very dangerous conditions like backdrafts and flashovers. A backdraft is a fire that has the fuel and the heat already inside the structure. It's basically a fire that has been burning and it's used up its amount of oxygen inside the structure. The heat and fuel are already there, and all it needs is an introduction of oxygen in order to start a very volatile explosion or fire. Backdraft conditions, when they're present, you will see very dark yellowish brown smoke. You'll see a pushing and pulling of smoke inside the structure, and the reason for that is because the fire is actually fighting for oxygen. It's trying to pull a draft through the house and suck air into the house so it can get oxygen to keep burning. Other things might include crackling of windows, popping of windows, smoke stained windows. That means that we have a lot of heat inside the structure, but no visible fire is present. If we see visible fire in the structure, that tells us most likely we don't have a danger of backdraft conditions because the fire has oxygen readily available to it, or else we wouldn't see the fire burning. In order to prevent backdrafts, we simply ventilate up high. We don't want to open up a window or pop a window or pull a door open because that introduces oxygen down at the fire's level at the seat of the fire, and we'll have a very volatile fire when that happens. You could even possibly have an explosion. So we're going to go to a high point and ventilate the fire vertically, most likely. If you can't ventilate it vertically, you try to ventilate it horizontally at the highest point that you can. Okay, another experiment we can do is something to show you what a backdraft is visually. We're going to use a plate of glass, some matches, and some liquid to show you how fire can create a draft and actually suck up contents like the liquid into a glass. If you can imagine the glass being the structure or your structure fire or house, You can basically see that if it's a good tightly sealed structure, we have a potential for backdraft because it doesn't have a breathing ability. There's no way for that oxygen to get into the glass. So we're going to ignite a fire, put a glass over the top of the fire to let it smother it out. We have heat and fuel there, but we do not have oxygen because we're smothering it. And the fire is basically going to fight to get oxygen. It's going to try to pull every bit of oxygen from underneath the glass to be able to keep burning. And when it does that, it's going to suck the liquid into the glass. In this experiment, we're igniting matches that are on a plate. We're going to take a glass and we're going to try to smother this fire. With the fire starving of oxygen, it's going to try to pull oxygen from underneath the glass, which sucks the liquid off the plate into the glass. In theory, we could actually have a backdraft if we timed it just right to introduce oxygen into that fire. Because the fire would already have fuel and heat, it just lacks oxygen. So how do we read smoke? There's a few things that we look at when we're reading smoke to tell us what's going on. One is the color of the smoke. Color of the smoke can tell us what type of products are burning. A lot of times nowadays, we have a lot of polymers, plastics, different types of hydrocarbons, a lot of different synthetic materials that are burning that release very, very dark type smokes. Class A combustibles, ordinary combustibles are generally going to be a lighter color smoke. We also look at the volume of the smoke, basically how much smoke's coming out. If we don't have very much smoke coming out, then our fire load is probably not very high. If we have a whole lot of smoke coming out, then that means that because the fire is generating a lot of smoke, it has a lot of material that it's burning. We also look at the velocity of the smoke. Basically, how fast is the smoke moving out of the structure? We can look at it as being pressurized or laminar. Laminar is going to be a very light moving smoke, barely moving out of the house. It tells us that it's a compartmentalized fire, probably just some contents burning. It hasn't really gotten going yet. Pressurized smoke lets us know that the fire's generated enough potential inside the structure that when now we have pressure differences in the structure, basically it's creating its own atmosphere inside that structure. So where we're getting a lot of pushing and pumping of smoke lets us know it's under pressure and that the fire really has a lot of energy behind it. In this clip, we have laminar smoke flow, which is a very low velocity smoke flow. This tells us the fire is in the very early stages. And because of the color of the smoke, we can tell we most likely have Class A products burning. We don't have very many synthetics, and the contents are probably the only things that are involved right now. Now notice the difference in color, velocity, and volume of the smoke. We have a darkening of the color, the speed or velocity of the smoke is picked up, and also we have much more smoke showing from the structure. Now you can see there is a little bit more pressure behind the smoke. This would be categorized as a pressurized smoke. If you look closely towards the Charlie Delta corner of the structure, you can see there's some fire coming out from around the corner. This is actually a window that is ventilated and the fire is burning out the window. If you notice, our smoke flow is starting to change. Because of the ventilation of the fire, we are losing our pressure behind the smoke, our velocity behind the smoke, and our volume behind the smoke. The fire, or the smoke rather, is becoming much more laminar.
I'm going to pause it for a second, see if I can. Did you notice how in this corner here, when he was talking about window had vented and so there were flames coming out? If you notice, and I think you could still see it, there's a little hint of red. What's happening is that the fire the smoke is catching fire as it moves up past this eave.
In this clip, I want you to notice the very dark smoke at the top portion of the doorway. This is known as the thermal balance. That smoke is very, very hot in the upper atmosphere of that room. If we went into that structure fire with a power cone or fog pattern up above our head, we could displace that heated gas back down to the floor with us. Now notice the smoke, its color, its velocity, and its volume. We have a good bit of fire going and it's producing a lot of smoke at a high velocity.
Now you can see the fire has naturally vented itself through the gable. This is going to change our smoke conditions very much because all that pressurized smoke now has somewhere to go. Now you can see after the ventilation, smoke and pressure, the color, the velocity has all changed. I hope some of those experiments and video footage helped.
So, you know, I know our structures are somewhat different in some respects than some of the kinds of structures you'll see, but I think you get a good idea from what that video clip about how this reading what's going on with the smoke, the byproduct of the fire inside the structure, tells us a lot about what's going on inside there. And when we create pathways for more cool air to enter, it causes the flames to get bigger, but it also causes the pressure to build, and that pressure has to come out some way, somehow. And actually, at a sort of a more advanced level, you can determine where the fire is on what floor in a building based on how you see the air going in and where you see that thermal line that he talked about. But you know, when you look at a picture like this one here now, we don't see any flames, but what we do see is a lot of smoke. It's dark smoke. It's angry, and so it's telling something about what's going on in the fire in that building. And then look at the difference of this one. We don't have nearly as much smoke. It's dark, but there's all these flames here. Let's go back to this one. This one, it's trying to find a way to it's pushing out really, really hard. The pressure's building, but there's not enough oxygen in there to really cause those flames, you know, to really create the vent path airflow to cause the flames to kick in the high gear. Whereas in this building, we do see that this happening. Okay, really good example of smoke is fuel.
25 years ago, when I began my fire service career, fire instructors used to say, never put water on smoke. We know that's not the case today. We know that smoke is fuel. Smoke is primarily made up of carbon monoxide, which is highly flammable and even combustible. The smoke being given off here is still within its flammable range.
Pretty dramatic. That's what we'd call a flashover or a backdraft. Both of those kind of fire situations occur when you have all that heat in a enclosed space. You introduce oxygen, and it's going to ignite. In this case, when he opens up the when he goes to open up this box,
25 years ago, when I began my fire service career, fire instructors used
when he goes to open up this box, that's like that closed up room, and you get to this house, and then you open up the door to that building, and you're suddenly going to let in all this oxygen, and it's going to cause all that built up pressure and smoke to ignite. And in this case, the picture is just showing how as that smoke comes out, it's just it's hot enough to ignite because that's what it is. It's fuel. So get out of this video and come back to here. So I lost my PowerPoint. That, friends, is my introduction to fire dynamics and fire behavior for you. It's a review of fundamentals, which I suspect lots of you have had at some point in your fire training. But as I said in the beginning, I think it's always good to review and remind ourselves. And if it's new material and something you hadn't really given that much thought to, then I'm glad to have introduced it to you. But as I said earlier on, a lot about fire dynamics is something we intuitively know and learn as kids. We know not to touch hot things because they burn. We know that if we get too close to a fire, it can burn us. That's the radiation. So we learn how it moves. We just don't often think about these elements, you know, and when we're in the context of firefighting, because we're looking at the fire, we want to put it out, or we're hearing lots of noise and stuff. So going back and reviewing and remind ourselves, this is how fire works. By the way, I don't know about you guys, but in my years as a firefighter, we went from, hey, there's a building on fire, let's go around and pop out the windows, because we thought we were venting the building. Well, you know, open it up, let things out. And what we now know is that every time we went around and we knocked out a window or we opened a door, we just created an airflow. We fed more oxygen to the heat and the fuel, and made the chemical process happen even faster. And that would lead to bigger, more dangerous fires. I remember one fire in particular early on in my career. It was a place that sold ATVs and motorcycles and things like that. Had 2 stores, 2 levels to it. And the top level was really the office. The bottom level was the showroom. And there was this fire there. And the owner said, can we open up this garage, the side door where we take our vehicles in and out, so we can get them out so they don't catch fire? And the fire department that was running the scene, we were mutual aid on it, said, yeah, sure, go ahead. So what do you think happened when they slid open the garage doors to start pulling out the various motorcycles and things that were in there? You got it. As soon as they opened up the door, the building went poof, just as you would expect. So there's a case of the folk we didn't remember our basic fire dynamics lessons. So last week I went a little over time, so this week I'm going to wrap up a little early and give you the opportunity for asking me any questions, sharing any comments that you might have. If you have some, go ahead and unmute myself. Oh, you know what? I almost forgot. I always like to end with this quote. I think it's so important for us in the fire service. The quote comes from a retired state trooper, which is like a police officer. He said, we don't rise to the occasion, we fall back on our training. Training is so critical for us. There's so much we have to train on, and we have to keep training on it, because we never know when we're going to have to respond to a situation that we haven't seen, we don't see very often. So on that note, I'm going to close out on my PowerPoint, and somebody has just arrived late. And as you know, these PowerPoints, these presentations are recorded. So if you got here late, or you missed a part, or you weren't clear about something, or even better, you want to share it with one of the firefighters in your department or your crew, it's available for you.